So this is kind of an interesting picture to start off with. This is the Bombay Mint, where they used to print money for the Indian economy, and just super interesting picture to see to start with. So I've been working on this project of studying India and the economy of India for a while, and there's just a lot to talk about. Basically, what I wanted to do is kind of focus on the stock market in India, and that is basically centered around this place called Mumbai, or formerly known as Bombay. And basically, you're looking at some pictures of what it looks like there. And we're going to go into a lot of details about each of these graphs, but I thought it'd be fun just to start with a couple of pictures of the area in addition to kind of the log graphs of what's going on. And here's kind of the skyline of the tip of Mumbai. And you need to think basically about both the stock prices and also what we're looking at right here, which is the price of the currency. So I kind of wanted to skip a couple of these and take a look at the Indian Stock Exchange. In India, there is the stock exchange basically in Mumbai, which is kind of on the west coast of India. And you can see that, relatively speaking, they're basically these two exchanges. It's kind of like the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. That's probably not the right way to say it, but essentially if you take two of these together, you get the size of their stock market is basically as big as Shanghai, as big as Hong Kong, as big as Europe's, but not as big as Japan. So basically, we're talking about $4 trillion collectively, and I really don't know how these numbers are calculated. Each one is 2 trillion, and it may be I'm not sure if there's like cross stocks traded on each one or what the deals are. So. But in terms of market capitalization for each one, it's 2 trillion each. So essentially, it's just slightly above that 2 trillion mark. You can see on that line there. So that basically makes it in the same logarithmic scale as these others. And that's kind of why I wanted to look at the Indian exchange first here, just to kind of, and also they have just so many companies traded on the Indian exchange. So from some of that World Bank data, you can actually break it down into specific countries. And what you're looking at here is basically the number of stocks that have been traded, total value. And so say if the total value of both of their main exchanges, and I think they have more than just two actually, but essentially if there's $4 trillion, approximately one in every four of those dollars has been traded every year, and you can see that's kind of varied a lot. It was down at 0.5, and then went up more recently to almost $1.2 trillion. So that's a little bit more than, say, one in every four. Stocks are traded every day, or not every day, but every year in terms of value. Just interesting fact. So I'm just going to start off with a quick couple images here of some of the largest companies in India and kind of see how every one kind of, at least these larger ones, compare. So you might be surprised. There's a lot of basically hidden economy and basically remaining economy here. And you can see that approximately 80% of all the businesses are not even in this list of these companies, right? So basically you can see that Reliance Industries, maybe about 3% of their total GDP. And the Indian Oil Corporation, collectively, these oil companies are basically about 5, maybe say 10% at most of the Indian economy. But still, that's a huge part of everything here that we're looking at. So believe it or not, this is actually the same graph that we were just looking at, but it's a logarithmic graph. And I just circled a couple different ones. So basically, Reliance Industries is the largest, with a revenue about, $60 billion per year. And you can see the Indian Oil Corporation and Oil and Natural Gas and State Bank of India kind of coming in around fourth there. And then you also have Tata Motors. So basically, transportation is a huge deal, and that kind of makes sense when you think about it. India is located in between the east and the west, in a lot of ways, and then you have this green area here of a lot of companies kind of in this range. And well, actually, not so many when you really think about it, because I'll show you some more graphs here in a moment. But basically, this different groupings here, and you can kind of see where each business kind of fits in to the overall Indian economy. So I just really like this graph because it shows kind of the relative size. So, for example, say if Reliance Industries has a revenue of about $80 billion, you can see that here it says about 14% of this. The relative size of the other, so 11, and you can just compare that to the 14%, which is actually 80 billion. But basically, you can get an idea for all the other companies, and actually, it makes Reliance look a little bit more balanced with the rest of the economy, even though basically it's not that balanced. But when you take into account that it's only, say, 3% of the total GDP, yes, it's certainly very significant, but just put things in better perspective here with the largest of these companies. Here at a few of these Indian stocks, and basically what we're looking at here is the blue. Well, this first of all, the SENSEX, which is the Indian stock index, is kind of this middle line through there, and the one that's just doing unbelievable is Reliance Industries. Now, next to that, I put the Indian Oil Company, and they do these .bo, and that's basically for the Bombay Stock Exchange. They also have that NS, I think, .ns for National Stock Exchange. One thing I don't really like is that almost all these companies are traded on both the Bombay and National Exchange. I'm not sure how that works. In terms of market valuation or even total number of shares, and even how the electronics works in terms of the details when you buy or sell a stock. But anyway, so the purple there, these are the Indian tickers with the .bos, and then I also added the oil and natural gas, which is the ONG. Pink one, and then you can see the State Bank of India, SBIN, and that's the Indian ticker again. And this is in percentage, so it won't really matter. And then the last two, I put two New York Stock Exchange traded tickers on here to compare. And that is Tata Motors, a TTM, and then IBN is the ICICI Bank in India. So you can kind of see, basically what's going on. Certainly pretty interesting to see a Reliance. You can see actually it was quite stable until quite recently. So that's, within the last 3 years, this has all changed. And I'm not even sure what to say about that. But you can see, that the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation has actually been going down for a number of years, their stock. And meanwhile, the State Bank of SBIN, State Bank of India has kind of been struggling in recent years, and so on. But and this certainly this dip was part of that recent years era. So you can kind of, I'll just try to zoom in here and kind of see. So it kind of changes the view of what's been going on, because this point way back here is kind of the starting point, and it does everything based on the percentages there. So if we say right around here, 2012, if I bring it back to there, this maybe is a more fair comparison in general, to just say, and let's do a quick analysis of indicators here of points that I thought were particularly interesting. This goes back essentially about 10 years. Um, and just a couple of things you see here that are kind of interesting. So you can see that the Indian Oil Company was actually doing slightly better, or at least has been, than a Reliance, and that kind of changed right around here, you'd say. But you can see that something in general in the economy was changing in that time frame, and actually not such a good thing, right? So you can see that this Reliance has been going up, and then the rest of the economy has kind of been struggling. So maybe inversely opposite. So there might be a lot of questions about that. But in particular, you can see back in here around 2013, and then going up to about here being a peak in 2015, right? So, and this is a really recent time frame. There's a lot going on here, right? So, and then of course the 2016 to 2017, and just a lot of like consolidation going on right around 2017 with these companies in here. So, just overview, kind of get an idea. So if you're wondering how I got some of these numbers, basically it's an estimate from the World Bank here, and you can see basically what I did is I took the size of, the revenue of the companies and kind of subtracted that from the total GDP to kind of give an estimate for relative size to the whole economy. So it's just a couple of interesting detailed facts. You can see that the per capita income in Mumbai is slightly less than Delhi, but in general, they're basically making about $15,000 a year. And just interesting to see the details for each state and kind of seeing, the per capita, because that's basically per person. And I for sure don't want to skip these other three: West Bengal, and then kind of this kind of west coast of India area, and then also Chennai as very interesting other alternatives to Mumbai and Delhi. Certainly, Delhi gets very hot, and it's kind of interesting just to see that. That this West Bengal area is number 3. That's actually kind of out towards Bangladesh and near the end of the river. I could show a couple pictures of that if you want, but and then the area Bengaluru area, kind of being near the nice west coast of India, and Chennai. And Chennai is a pretty interesting city, kind of on the other side of India, but also near the tip of India there. But yeah, just super interesting to see just some other cities here being very important in India. And I just did a quick little graph here of the income in GDP per capita for all of India. So this is the entire country, and you can see that on average, they're probably even above about $8,000 per year per person in India. It's quite a lot. It's doing good. Means they have some money, and certainly interesting future. So you might ask yourself, why study India? One reason is that India is kind of in the center of a lot of things between the East and the West, and essentially even between Africa and the rest of the world as well. So, historically, the spice trading routes basically went around India, probably mostly by water and ship. Around the tip there of India, and then also by land as well. But basically, you see India is basically in between here, most of Asia, and also is one of the most, as you know, populous places in the world in terms of number of people. So it may be interesting to start off looking at India geographically here. I wanted to look at the kind of the ocean and more of the western side of India. And interestingly, most of Asia is actually on the eastern side. Actually, most of the wealth in India is actually on the coast over here, and most of the people actually live in the foothills, kind of along where you would see Mount Everest on the edge here on the mountain range. Another interesting fact about India is that the wealthiest person in all of Asia, who actually is significantly wealthier than the next person, is actually an Indian person. They have this company called Reliance Industries. It's kind of a conglomerate. And then you can also see some other details here, like Japan and even South Korea. So a company like Samsung, how far that is behind essentially the wealthiest person in Asia, which is the Indian person. So I just wanted to start off by looking at the GDP here of India and get an idea so what's been going on. So you can see for basically the 1800s and the early part of the 1900s, the GDP per capita was about $500. And then after the 1950s, things really started to get a lot better, and basically it's been growing exponentially, and it's just hard to appreciate these graphs here with just how fast the economy is growing in India. In addition to looking at the stock market, also very important is looking at the Indian Rupee and what's been going on with that over the many years here. Basically, what you can see, there's kind of two general trends. American currency and, for example, Japanese currency and also the euro, you can see basically with the euro, over time in general, the Indian rupee has been losing value compared to the euro. Actually, the euro has been doing kind of the best, you could say, in terms of change, and but you also see this trend where for the United Kingdom's currency, basically United Kingdom actually lost value, so people didn't want their currency up until about 2010. You can see that kind of U'd up there, meaning that you got essentially you could get more of the English currency for the Indian rupee, and then all of a sudden it went down again. But in general, this kind of gives you an overview of the Indian rupee's value. You can see it's roughly about 50 or 60 to 1. So $1 gets you about 55 or so, 60, depending on the year, and so on. Just showing you what's been going on since about the 1970s overall, right? So up here, you have the current exchange rate, which is basically about 70 to 1. So you can see that there was kind of some stabilization, basically roughly since about 2002 up to even as far as 2011, and then so that was a pretty good time frame. In general, you saw about 45 to 1. So if you had $1, you could get 45 rupees. But a lot of the loss, this is an exponential graph, so I could change this to a regular graph. You can kind of see it makes it look like this part is more significant, but really the big changes were back in from 1988 to 1995. So I'm going to go back to the log graph here, and you can see that this jump up here was super significant, as well as from the 1980s. So back in the 1980s, you'd almost say it was similar to what we have with an exchange rate with China today, or, for example, Brazil and Latin America. So that was basically 1970s, 1980s, and then a big jump up, almost losing half the value. So that's really huge. I mean, you think about going to the store and having to pay twice as much, 5 years later or 10 years later. So that's just not good. And then another big jump, a loss in currency value to 95. But really, it was from 1988 over to 1995, where the Indian economy was really starting to struggle. And then kind of maybe some positive stuff after 2002 and so on. And actually, recently, there's a lot of problems with the currency. So even though they're growing really fast, you kind of have to look at the currency value as well and inflation, because obviously, losing. Let's get this on a percent graph here. So, like when you go from losing essentially 200% of your value, that's quite a lot of money to be lost in terms of measuring your GDP and all that. So with basically the bottom one being the S&P 500 compared to the Indian exchange, and of course, with a smaller economy, you can see that this means that the S&P 500 has been doing about the same as, and even there, parts of it has been doing better than the Indian exchange. But if you break that back to, essentially 2004, it looks like the Indian exchange is a lot better. And we can even do a log graph to kind of compare. And the middle one here is the NIFTY index. So I've been having some problems kind of, but I kind of like the Bombay index just because Bombay, they're both in Bombay area, but the NIFTY is kind of a little bit farther outside of town and not as nice to live and work in. Where if you were anyway, but so you can see basically the S&P 500 relative. Now this is the actual prices, and you can see that so every level here is equivalent to a pretty significant jump, and it's almost equivalent to lower points as there are upper points. So you don't really see that with the regular graph. It's a little hard to see that those changes. So it's just nice to look at the log graph to kind of see some details that you wouldn't otherwise see when comparing them. We can even add the Nikkei Index, and that one is the yellow one here at the bottom. So you can see kind of some, Nikkei is going even slower than the S&P 500, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Having a stable economy and so on. But anyway, interesting to see. So one of the really interesting ideas to kind of help out with in India is poverty, and to what extent there is poverty, and where it's located, and essentially where people are doing well. And I found this pretty interesting list of kind of showing, relatively speaking, how wealthy each region is in India relative to other parts of the world, and I just thought it'd be interesting to take a look. So here is that graph and data. So I just circled a couple of interesting kind of details here. And on the lower side here, you can see these places that are similar to like Sri Lanka and Uruguay and Macau. So actually there's quite a lot of things being produced in India. And you can see that even Greece, just a small state like West Bengal, and Vietnam is equivalent to Gujarat, and Chile is equivalent to Tamil Nadu area, and their richest area right at the top there. So, but it's interesting to see also the map really quick. Let's just look at that again. Fun here to take a look at these locations. So if you're not familiar with India, basically it's right here, and this is Mumbai, formerly called Bombay, and so basically these two exchanges. There's this little. It's kind of hard to see unless you zoom in really carefully here, but I'll try to zoom in and see if we can get some details. But basically what you're looking at here is this bay here, and it's kind of covered up, but you can see this almost like hook. heading out here into the ocean, and that is Mumbai. And on the tip here, much like you have in Manhattan, there's kind of this, except for Manhattan's an island. This is kind of more of a peninsula, and you have a lot of these bigger buildings out on the end here. And this red dot here is the stock exchange, so it's kind of a nice location. Located here. Unfortunately, it doesn't really have a 3D perspective, but you can kind of see here, and fairly close to the ocean. You got this pretty large area for shipping and so on. And this is a pretty important spot in Mumbai. Interestingly, the National Stock Exchange, so we're just looking at this part here, but the National Stock Exchange is kind of farther, kind of off in this more centralized location in some senses, but maybe not as desirable to live. And, if you look in here, you can see, it's kind of back in here, maybe near the airport, closer to there, and so on, right? So but there are other sides, from what I understand, there's kind of their Bollywood area, and a lot of people like to live up here on the beach. So it's not bad. There's other places that are close, but it's just different than basically this more, I would say, historical place back in here. But basically gives you a perspective of what's going on. Certainly fairly different than Wall Street, but interesting. Say we understand the Indian economy until we look at this log graph. And obviously, when you switch it to the linear graph, it makes it look like these recent years were huge, when in fact, the log graph shows this is kind of more of a stabilizing time frame, and the big years were really from about 2003, the spring of 2003, all the way up to about the winter of 2007. And that was really a global financial crisis at that point. But you can see that, yes, it was huge, 2009 to basically November of 2019. But relatively speaking, this was a lot faster time frame going up in just a few short years, and it just almost straight up. Imagine trying to climb this if this was a mountain, right? You're just going straight up here. This is a lot more casual up kind of climb. So you can kind of see two different pictures here. This is the Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange. So just very different buildings, very different locations. Here we got the Bombay Stock Exchange, and then in light blue you could see the S&P 500. And one thing I would just say is that, wow, the Bombay Stock Exchange is just going up like crazy. So you have like a 200% increase, and then here you have almost 800 or more percent increase, and who knows what's really going on, right? So now, obviously, very different size differences here as well, right? 200% difference on $20 trillion is different than 800% difference on, say, a few $1 trillion. But basically, you can see that this volume profile is maybe not very accurate, but you can basically get an idea for this. It may be interesting to add the Shanghai composite on this. Red, you have the Shanghai Index, and for as much as I've been looking at this India and China kind of statistics in terms of the economy, and the Chinese economy just looks so much larger. But when you look at the stock market, at least in terms of the growth, the Indian Stock Exchange has really been growing a lot, and it really changed after 2009. And the hard part to say about this is that, um, the Chinese economy is just so much larger than the Indian economy, and yet from the stock market perspective, um, it may be that if we're basically looking at $2 trillion a market here for the Indian exchange, and then about a 4 trillion. But when you add the national stock exchange to this, you're basically adding both. So let's add the national stock. Basically, about what we were thinking. The national stock exchange is following. So there's the Mumbai exchange or Bombay exchange, and then the national exchange. And you can see that basically they follow about the same path. Which should make sense. NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange do, but there is a slight difference. You can see that the National Stock Exchange was doing slightly better here, and kind of like lagging the Bombay or Mumbai Exchange in this part, but and maybe even going through a change here. So. In some ways, you could say that maybe a lot of Indians favor the National Stock Exchange, just because it's been going up a little bit faster. But we really have to take a look at that from about 2000 and because basically what we're looking at the tickers here is the NIFTY, which for some reason didn't show up as kind of the orange yellow, but and then the Shanghai Exchange and the Bombay, and then this is the S&P 500. So you can kind of see that actually the Indian exchange is kind of tracking pretty closely with the American exchange, which can be a good thing and can be a bad thing. And the Chinese exchange is really not similar at all. So in recent years, you'd say that the American exchange, at least since about 2009, you can see that the red line there is just a lot lower for China. So that may be an interesting fact to think about. Chinese economy not doing so well relative to India or America even. So and a lot of that kind of changed since this 2011 time period, right? So I think there's a lot of people that look at the economy and say, well, wow, there's a lot of agriculture. But actually, I think, not maybe a popular view, but agriculture is great, man. Food is awesome. And especially if you have a lot of people in your country, it's even more important to have a good food industry. And a lot of people that even plant the food and grow it, watch it grow, and so on. But you can also see manufacturing, construction, and then trade and transport. So it's kind of surprising because as we looked at all the companies in India, the top 5% or so are all mainly transport, oil-based kinds of companies. But you can see that the employment in terms of people is quite a bit different. So this graph is kind of difficult to discuss just from personal reasons. But I think, in the 1980s, you can see that certainly the service-based economy and the agriculture, that was a big change, having a lot, essentially having more people do services in terms of the GDP. But basically, there's another point here that you can see around 1995 where industry was larger than agriculture, but you can kind of see some downward trends there and maybe even some upward trends for agriculture too from time to time. But interesting to see kind of over 50, 60 years of what's been going on. Anyway, hope you really enjoyed this study of India and the economy of India. There's a whole lot to study. I've been working on it for a while. There's just a lot of different perspectives and ideas, and certainly, from my perspective, it really helped to look at all of the rest of Asia, particularly all the islands like Philippines, Indonesia, and even Myanmar and Thailand, and just also compare that to what's going on in the Middle East and even in Africa, and just kind of looking at how India fits in kind of as a central piece to that, and also how all the other cultures are super important to look at as well. Hope you enjoyed the study. Here's some details on some of the places that I looked for information. I also included at the very end here, you'll see a link to the actual charts and data on kind of a spreadsheet, Google documents, and so on. Hope it helps. Let me know what you think. See you.